Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. Who has used MapRoulette before? Who has used MapRoulette before? I'll try and speak a little louder. So I'm going to do a walkthrough first to show you what MapRoulette is, and then we're going to talk about how you can help people make OpenStreetMap better through MapRoulette, through a process that we call creating challenges. And I'll explain what all that is in a little bit. You can follow along. I had to create a PDF version of this presentation, but the whole thing is online. It's pretty much the same thing anyway, but there's a URL bit.ly/MapRoulette-workshop-SOTM, and that's also where these slides will remain available after the fact into eternity or whenever Google goes out of business. Today's topics. So first, an interface walkthrough. So what is MapRoulette? The basics of solving problems, OpenStreetMap problems through MapRoulette, and also the administration interface. So when you log in, how you can administer your own stuff that you create in MapRoulette. Then a few words about what makes a good MapRoulette challenge. And again, all those words will be explained shortly. The challenge wizard that we have to create challenges, and then the MapRoulette API, that's also another way for programmers to create challenges. So those are the things, and I hope to have quite a bit of time left. I'm not planning to talk for 75 minutes for sure, more like 30 probably, and then we'll have time for questions and discussion, and kind of bring your own ideas for challenges. I hope that this workshop will give you a few ideas. So when you go to MapRoulette.org, this is what you'll see. You see basically a big map that shows locations, and the locations represent sort of the centers of where the challenges are. So you can see that there's a challenge in Argentina. There's one challenge that looks like it's in California, a few, and then in the central part of the U.S. So you can drag around and see more challenges. There's a search box that you can use if you know what you're looking for in a challenge, and then there's a few kind of featured items and latest challenges. And then of course you can sign in there at the top. Signing in goes through OpenStreetMap, so you just get redirected through OpenStreetMap, and then you log in there, and you get redirected back, and then that will create your MapRoulette account or sign you into it if you already have one. So if you zoom in a little bit and you click on an individual challenge icon, you get a little bit of detail of what a challenge is. And a challenge is basically a group of tasks, and tasks are little things that you can do to improve OpenStreetMap. So they're grouped into challenges, and this particular challenge is about pools. So someone detected using computer vision, using public records, addresses that should have pools. So a lot of people in the Los Angeles area apparently have pools in their homes, and those are not yet in OSM. So and then it says a little bit about little circle shows how many of those tasks have already been resolved. That's the green part. So this one has most of it is still to be done. The difficulty, which is the self-assigned by the author of this challenge, how hard it is, easy, normal, or hard, and then you can view the entire challenge, so you'll get a map of all of its tasks, or you can start it, which means it will take you to a random challenge. That's the roulette part of MapRoulette. It's very random. So if you enter a challenge, you get thrown into it, and you will get a random task. So it could be anywhere within the scope of the challenge. That makes it fun, I think, to solve them, because you never really know what you're getting. And that's what worked very well in the past. So when you view the challenge, you get like a distribution clustered of where all the tasks are in this particular case, it's just one single area in the Los Angeles metro. And then this represents a single task. This is of a different challenge. I skipped it a little bit here. This is a challenge that has rivers that float in the wrong direction. So someone went and created, or took an elevation model and then took all the streams and rivers in OSM, and the direction of the river is supposed to be the same as the direction in which the river flows. So whenever the OSM object that represents the river flows in this direction, but the elevation model shows that that's actually uphill, then that would get flagged, and people would be asked to reverse that. So this is one individual task. This basically shows you the difference between being logged in and not being logged in. The difference is that you can, so in the right bottom, you can edit now, and you can mark something as a false positive. You can't do any of those things if you're not logged in. You also have a few more items on the left, as you can see, as I scroll back and forth. I'll go into those in a little bit, and of course you see your little your OSM username there at the top as well. Otherwise, I mean, you can do a lot of things like viewing everything when you're not logged in as well. So you have a little profile page. Where's my clicker? Oh, there it is. A little profile page where you can see some basics about your identity on MapRoulette, which is basically a lot of the same stuff that's already in this. What's there is just what's in OSM, what we get from OSM. You get an API key, which will become important later. And then there's a few things that you can set, some defaults you can set. There's a misspelled version of JOSM, which actually should be JOSM, but says just JSOM. Which is, I think, fixed in the meantime. I apologize. You can set a default base maps for your challenge. Challenges can also set their own default base map. You can, for those who don't do that, you can set your own default base map that you see when you navigate around MapRoulette. You can also set like a custom tile URL as a custom base map if you really want that. And some people did, so I did. So we did that. Your default locale, which basically just determines the language for now. And there's a few stubs of translations. If you want to help out translating into more languages, please do. And then there's some gratuitous theme selection that you can engage with. So you can, I mean, it basically just determines the color of the top bar. There's metrics. We all love metrics. This is basically tells you how much progress is being made on MapRoulette in various ways. How many things have been fixed over time, and you can change the time scale of that as well. So this is all available also when you're not logged in. It's available on a global scale, so through all challenges. Currently there are about 100 in MapRoulette. But you can also see this for individual challenges, including, of course, the ones that you make yourself, which is what we're here for. Administration interface. So this is where the challenge wizard lives. You can get there through clicking projects on your left. This is what you see when you're logged in. Every user gets one project. A project is basically a space where all your challenges live. So every user has one, and you can create as many challenges underneath within your project as you want. So for a default user, you'll just see one project in the list because you only get one. If you want more, you can ask me and I'll create more. But any challenge, as many challenges as you want, can live under one project. So that's the basic hierarchy, right, for MapRoulette stuff. You have your project. You get one when you first log in. You can create as many challenges as you like, and any challenge can get as many tasks as you like. It's probably not smart to have too many tasks in one single challenge, just because it becomes very hard to kind of see the end of it. If you have 100,000 tasks in your challenge, you probably want to split it up a little bit because, yeah, I think it's just not fun. If you have 100,000 things that you need to fix, it kind of seems insurmountable, and it becomes very hard to get users to help you out. This I basically already covered. Every user gets one project. You can create any number of challenges, and you can have any number of tasks within those challenges. So by default, projects and challenges have visibility. Visibility is by default always false, so you can create something and it won't be visible to on the map that shows all the challenges, but rather you can set that later. So your project can be visible or invisible, but also your challenges can be visible or invisible. And you can set that through clicking on the little drop-down menu on the right, and there will be an edit item which will give you access to the project settings where you can set the name, description that's not being used right now, and the visibility. So how about creating a challenge? There's two ways that I'm going to talk about next. That's kind of the bulk of the workshop. One is through the MapRoulette website, which I call, for lack of a better name, the wizard, and then there's the API. Both of these things will get some attention. Who of you have created MapRoulette challenges in the past already? 0. Okay, well, that's great. You'll learn how to do it now. Well, I mean, there's already quite a few people who have done it. So I was wondering if any of them would be here to see how, because this MapRoulette version, I've completely failed to mention that is new, and the old version had a different API and did not have a wizard at all. So I think the wizard is one of the main things that I'm very, very happy with in the new MapRoulette. There's still a ton of work to be done, but this is something that allows basically anyone. So you used to have to use the API to make a challenge, and that puts up a barrier to a whole lot of people because not everybody knows how to work with an API. Like most people don't. But a lot of people have ideas on how to query OpenStreetMap in a way that it surfaces tiny little errors that we want fixed, but they don't necessarily know how to put that into a form that would make it into a MapRoulette challenge. So that's where this wizard comes in, and that's what we're going to spend the next time on. The API is actually going to be last, so I'm going to skip this for now. So what makes a great challenge? Challenges are easy to come up with. So I'll give one example that I've used in the past a lot. So how about you make a query for all the restaurants in a city that don't have opening hours. Like restaurants points in OSM are much more useful if they have opening hours or maybe a website tag. It's very easy to query for those that don't, and then you can put them in a MapRoulette challenge and have people add that information by just looking it up on the internet through public information that the business itself provides. There's tons of other examples. This is just a simple example. Did anyone come here with an idea of a challenge that they wanted to make already? Is there anyone who has already had plans? Take a city and completely public transport tagging version 2 tag it. Yeah, that would probably be possible. As long as you can query it, as long as you can query for the information that's not right or missing, you can put it in MapRoulette and make it into a challenge. But I wanted to share a few words about like what I think would makes good challenges or great challenges rather than kind of ones that probably won't get a lot of attention. Just based on my experience. So here's a few things. Good instructions are extremely important, and every task can get its own instruction. Usually you have the same instruction for every single task. You can use Markdown, which is a simple language similar to HTML, but even simpler, that you can use to kind of create links and make things bold, make a really clear instruction. You can even add little images if you need to clarify things, and those will appear every time a user a task is displayed to a user. That instruction gets displayed with it. So those are key to having a good challenges, having good instructions. It needs to be simple in the sense that it targets individual OSM objects, not whole areas, so that we have the tasking manager for that, right, to fix entire areas of stuff. You need to be very specific. I want this object fixed this way, this relation, this node. The question also needs to be specific, not like, can you improve this way? No, you have to be very specific. Can you add tag XYZ to this way, or can you make sure that the direction is right, or can you do it? So you have to ask a very specific question. That's the MapRoulette is really about a quick flow of like, I want to fix this, I want to fix this, fix this, and fix this, and do like maybe 5 tasks in a minute rather than 1 task in 5 minutes. Although you can have more elaborate tasks, but you just have to make sure that you ask a specific question that users don't get distracted too much. I mean, we all know how distracting mapping can be once you start an area. Okay, oh, I'll fix this, I'll fix this. I know, I've done it 1,000 times. So all of that adds up to it becoming addictive and fun. So people need to really get into the flow. MapRoulette is really an armchair tool, and as much discussion as there has been about armchair mapping throughout the history of OSM, this is an armchair tool, so you don't want users to have to need local knowledge unless you have a MapRoulette challenge that is really designed to be done by people that live in your neighborhood or in your town or in your village. Examples of that are like to have people verify stuff against aerial imagery. Like, is there a cemetery here? Can you see it on aerial imagery or not? So this is, for example, in the US we've had a cemetery import that was, or like a import of various types of features, but cemeteries among them. And some of the data has not been verified for 50 years. So a lot of those cemeteries are probably gone, even though cemeteries have a pretty good lifespan usually by their nature. Another example might be that upstream river. You also technically don't need local knowledge for that because you would be able to see from the aerial imagery whether it flows up or downhill in most cases. I mean, there's always going to be exceptions. Loops, road loops that you can never escape might be another example. That's easy to verify even without aerial imagery. The links are actually in the presentation. Those are challenges that exist today. And not huge, as I said. Like if you have many thousands of tasks, it's probably better to split them up a little bit. Let's see. Yeah. Let's get into an example. And here we get into the. Any questions so far about MapRoulette? What it is, what it does, what it doesn't do? Or can I just continue? Okay. Right, question is, right, so the question is it more geared towards fixing or adding stuff? I think it can be used for adding, but I think if you're going to be asking people to add features just based on the previous rule applies. Like if a question is very specific, so can you add this building or can you add this based on some external source or something? I think that would be fine. If you're going to be asking people to add like something more abstract, like can you add all the buildings in this area, then I think Tasking Manager is probably a better tool. So it's more of a fixing tool. It can be used for adding as well, but you would have to have very specific information. For example, some external data source. MapRoulette could take the place of a fully automatic import and make it into a manual import if you have some external data that you want verified. Oh, yeah. So the example that I was going to do, does that answer your question, Miriam? Yeah. Okay. An example that I'd like to explore is, again, a fairly simple one. The opening hours. This time applied to museums and zoos rather than restaurants. So again, I want to keep it simple to focus on the process rather than the challenge. So this is an overpass query that would get those things out of OSM for you for the state of Utah where I live. So overpass so the MapRoulette wizard consumes overpass queries, so you can use that to make your challenge. If you know a little bit of Overpass is a super useful thing to learn if you want to work with OSM data. So if you don't know it yet, go to Overpass Turbo, which is probably the easiest way to get started, and check out some of the examples, and come up with a few questions of stuff that you'd like to get out of OSM. So in this case, I don't want to get into the overpass query itself. I'm happy to do that with you if you're interested later. But this overpass query gets all the zoos and museums that don't have overpass in the area or the state of Utah. And if you load that into Overpass Turbo, this is what you get. And I'm just checking if that there's not a huge number of features that come out of that. In this case, it's only 48, so that's very reasonable. And this query took only like 10 seconds to run, I think. So that's fairly easy, fairly quickly done. What you do next is you go to the project screen again, and in that same drop-down menu, you can start a new challenge. And there's four steps basically. The general information step, where the important instruction part comes into play. Then where the actual data comes in step 2. The geometries for the challenge. And then the third step would be the third and fourth step are optional. I'm going to go into those a little bit later, very briefly. So the first step is the challenge metadata, if you will. So that's where you give the challenge a name. You give it a description. Description is not very widely used within Meprolight yet. And then the most important part really there is the instruction. So the name should be short. It should describe what you want people to do in just a few words. This is how the challenge gets identified when you click on it on the map. And then the most important other required part is the instruction. So here's what I did for this challenge. This tourism attraction does not have opening hours in OSM. It would help visitors to this place if you would add these. Look up their website and find the opening hours there, and then add them to the node in OSM. If you use JAWSM, we recommend using the opening hours editor plugin. And then I added some more that you can't see here. But you see that it's a very specific instruction that really tells users what they should be doing. And I think that helps a lot with users, kind of the Meprolight mappers, being able to understand what they need to do. I added some tags as well, which helps people find them to the search function of Meprolight. The difficulty is also set there. I mean, you can set that yourself. By default, it's normal. If you have something that's particularly easy to fix, then you can set it to easy. And then here you click next, and you have that's where the overpass query comes in. There's actually 3 ways to add the Meprolight tasks. This is where the tasks get added. So one of them is the overpass query. That's where you basically just copy it from Overpass Turbo, and you paste it in the Overpass API field. The other 2 methods are to upload GeoJSON to MapRoulette, which is another way that a lot of people like. And you can also point to a URL where some GeoJSON lives on the internet. One thing that's important is that the out statement. So this is the statement where the overpass result gets output to the user. Contains these specific parameters. This is explained in the wizard as well. It's just something that you need to adhere to when you create the overpass query. So briefly, the 2 optional steps. You can prioritize tasks that you want to have fixed first based on specific OSM tags. So there's a little bit of a prioritization rule interface there. It's not being used much yet, but it could be useful if you, for example, you have roads that are like primary, secondary, tertiary. You want the primaries fixed first, and then the secondaries, and then the tertiaries. Then that might be useful to prioritize them that way. Some extras that you can set: the minimum, maximum zoom levels, the default zoom level that is shown to the user, the base map that the user gets shown. You can also add custom base maps if you have a tile URL that you want to use instead of the default. So if you have specific aerial imagery for a region or something, then you can add that there. And then basically you click the complete button, and then it will start. You can see. Do I have a laser here? Well, I guess you can see that it says building, which basically means that it's going to overpass. It's fetching all the things, and then it will populate Meprolight in the background with the tasks. And then finally, if it's done, it will say here in the bottom. If you reload it, it will say that there's 48 tasks there, which is how many tasks were in the overpass query result. So once that's done, you can see that there's in fact 48 now. I waited a little bit, and then you can go and view that challenge, and you'll see basically the same thing as you saw in Overpass, just displayed a little differently. There's the 48 tasks, the same ones that we saw in Overpass Turbo. And here's an example. So that's when you zoom in into one single task and view it. You see here a museum that doesn't have opening hours. You can see it on the base map, but you cannot see, of course, that it doesn't have opening hours because the base map does not display that. One little bug that you can see here is that the link that I posted to the OSM opening hours editor plugin shows up in white, whereas the box itself is also white. That's a really annoying little bug that I think I fixed by now. So and then you basically you see the map, the URL there. This is basically the URL. The parts of the URL is basically Meprolightorg and then map, and then 524 is your challenge ID, and then the last part is just the task ID. So if you want to share this at this point, you can share this URL with anyone you want to help with solving this challenge. And if you share the link, it will be accessible even if the challenge is not set to visible. The only difference that setting it to visible makes is that it will appear in the Meprolight interface when people search for challenges or discover them by using the map on the main page. So your challenge is basically now done. Other links that you then have for your challenge using the same challenge ID, the metrics is available through that UI-matrix URL, and then you can see that overview mapped through the view URL. So these URLs are static and always available for your particular challenge ID. So how's that looking? Do you think you can work with this? Questions? Yeah.
You said you should split the tasks into more subtasks.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, for Zeus, we would split that into 50 US states.
Right. The question was, if we don't want too many tasks, is this one example where you would want to split it into, for example, challenges for different states? Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. Also because you can then engage more local users, because challenges are always more attractive for people who are kind of a little bit more familiar with the area. So, for example, in my Salt Lake City OpenStreetMap meetup, I can point people to this challenge, and they would immediately recognize this problem because they will know many of these museums and zoos, and that always helps with engagement, and that is on top of the reason that I mentioned before, that challenges with thousands of tasks just seem kind of too overwhelming to people. So yeah, I think that's a great idea in this case, to spread it out geographically, and through the Overpass API, that's fairly simple to do. And actually, if you have a challenge, you can, if you have a challenge and you created it once, you can clone it also and make it available as a new challenge and just change the parameters a little bit, so you don't have to type in everything again. Any other questions so far? Because the next up is the API, so I'm going to switch a little bit. Yeah.
How does it work? Is this service coming with a crowd, or should I promote it?
Right. The question is whether you should promote it, or is there some way to promote it for you? What, that part I don't understand.
Or does it have already enough users?
Oh yeah, MapRoulette. So it definitely helps if you. The question is like whether there's already enough of a crowd using it to that you don't have to do anything. At this point, the answer is no. You definitely should tell people about your challenges. I have a lot of ideas for the future on how to better promote new challenges. Stuff like having like a weekly email for that contains all the interesting new challenges. Through the API, you could do stuff like extracting the most popular challenges and make a list of that. So there's a lot of stuff that could be done, but right now MapRoulette is still kind of, even though there is about 100 challenges in there, the discoverability is not great enough that you would get away with just posting it and expecting people to just start solving problems. So definitely promote it. It helps the general kind of name recognition of MapRoulette in itself, and get more users to kind of discover new things. So yeah, that's a good question. I think that's definitely going to be important that everyone helps out with that. Did you have a question also?
Yes, you said that the task have to be doable about local knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I could have an image of certain things I would like people to know. Even if they don't have no local knowledge, but by looking at the image, they could do the task. So is there any integration for preview or something like that?
The question is if you could link people to specific images, then you might be able to kind of yeah, you're basically saying that through images you can have like kind of fake local knowledge because you mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so basically integration with external images like OpenStreetView, whether that would be possible. Technically, yes. You would have to then probably do it through the API. The wizard is not powerful enough to kind of create that sort of integration. But if you have a set of images that you know are that you know the locations for, then you would through that be able to create an API, and you would be able to create an image link for the instruction that has the image even in the instruction, so you can have it right there, and have people look at the image directly in MapRoulette even. So it's definitely possible. It just takes a little bit more work, and you have to go beyond what's available for through the wizard. Yeah, you would have to work through the API. But I think that's a great bridge to go through that. Let me do a time check real quick. Oh, okay, good. So this is the part that's more for programmers, for people who want to develop links between their application or their data and MapRoulette. So they want the people who want to create tasks programmatically or consume data from MapRoulette to use it in some way that I don't know yet what that would be. There's automatically generated documentation at port 8000 of MapRoulette.org that you can see there. There's no real nice documentation yet, so this workshop for now, the slides for this workshop will have to function as the nice documentation. Maybe there will be something nicer in the future, but just yeah, these slides should give you a good pointer into kind of the main flow that you might want to use. First thing you need to find out is your API key. I pointed at that before. You can just copy that from there. If it's somehow compromised, you can rebuild your API key as well with one click if you somehow posted it on GitHub by example or whatever. Then the next thing you need to figure out is what is your project ID, because everything needs to be under your project. So, and a lot of API calls reference the project that a challenge lives under. So that's, in this case, that's project number 9. First thing you do is create the challenge. And I'm going to kind of walk through this without going over every single detail, but I'll point out a few of the salient parts here. The endpoint is, in these set of slides, the endpoint is always at the top. So in this case, it's /API/v2/challenge. And the HTTP headers are at the top, and then the post content is at the bottom. So what's important to note here is that the API key needs to be in this specific header format. So the key is API key with a capital K, and then the API key itself is the value. And then the payload is basically just a very simple JSON object that has the name, the description. The parent would be the project, because you're creating a challenge, right? A challenge lives underneath a project, so you need to define the parent through the project ID. This is where the project ID comes in. A few things that a couple things that I didn't pay so much attention to, which are optional. Which is a blurb, which is a kind of a shorter description, which is optional, so you can just leave that out really. And then the instruction is the very important part where you tell users what to do, and whether it's enabled or not. The only two mandatory parts here are the name and the instruction, if I'm correct. I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's correct. The other things, and the parent, of course, because otherwise Meprolight has no way of knowing where to put it. And then the response would be kind of basically a very similar JSON, but where you would get an important part of information that you get there is the challenge ID, which is new for a newly created challenge, and that you will have to use in subsequent calls to create tasks and modify challenges. So if you want to update it, it's the same endpoint with the challenge ID attached to it, and that would make it a put request, not a post request. Everything else stays the same. You only have to mention what you want to change. In this particular case, I changed the name, and I set it to enabled, and the response will reflect what that the changes were made. In this case, the name has in fact been changed, and the challenge has been set to enabled. So now the most exciting part is adding tasks, of course. This is where it gets, well, the JSON gets a little bit more interesting. It's basically a big list of tasks, and each task gets a name that you assign yourself, and then a geometry. That's the minimum amount of information that it needs to be in there. Actually, I made a little mistake here. The names are duplicated, which is not allowed. Each task needs to have a unique name. What Meprolight actually internally does is it assigns an identifier for each task that you need to use to refer to it in the future. Oh, the response is just a 201. There's no JSON there. It's just basically the fact that it's been created. So if you then go back in and retrieve the challenges, retrieve the task that you just made, which is basically a GET request that says challenge ID / tasks. You get both those tasks back. The one thing that's new is the task ID. So there's one, there's the other, and the names that you gave yourself. So you can link those. Then you can link those two things together. You can then go ahead and delete a task based on its ID. The ID is then wrapped into the URL here. Notice that there's no reference to the challenge or the project in this URL. This is just a direct access to the task with a HTTP delete, and then a confirmation in the JSON, which is not technically necessary. You can then also go ahead and delete your challenge again. Then it's gone forever. So you're free to do that, of course, at any point. But realize that there's no undoing this. There we go. A little bit of kind of metadata about this API. All of it requires the API key, except for the get method. So you can get any information about the challenge. And there's many more methods that I didn't really go into because they're all described they all follow the same basic pattern. They just require they're all described in the documentation. Everything that writes to Meprolight requires the API key. You can only operate on things in your own project, obviously. In terms of reading, you can read anything out of Meprolight through the API, anything you want. But writing you can only do on things in your own project. You cannot create new projects for yourself. You have to be a super user to do that, and the only super user is me. You can ask for one though. I mean, maybe I'll do it in the future. I don't really see a great reason for people to create more projects. But if people want to create projects, then I'll probably add it in the future. Some help that I would like on the project in general, if anyone is interested in that. Better discovery of challenges. Right now, this map view, I've gotten a lot of feedback about that it's just not, people are confused when they first go into MapRoulette, so where do I start, what do I do? And they see a map with some markers on it, so it's kind of confusing. The old MapRoulette had a list of challenges that it would call up, and people actually like that better. So I want to bring that back. It's all front-end work, so it's all kind of HTML, JavaScript, CSS. So all of these items actually, except for the translation. There's a lot of issues on GitHub that are small bugs in the user interface mostly. Very few in the API. The API is pretty solid. Translation into your language. The translation is a simple strings file that is very easy to pick up. We probably could put it on Transifex or something like that even. Then of course, yeah, your feedback is immensely valuable for this project. We're really only at the start of the new version. It's been out for a few months now, but I can see this. I still need a lot of feedback on what works and what doesn't. So that's what I'm hoping that you will help me provide as well. So this was the walkthrough of creating challenges. If you have any, like the rest of the time I would like to spend, I don't know how much there's left, but there is some. The rest of the time I would like to spend basically for questions and discussion, of course, but if you already had an idea and you want to kind of explore how to put that on MapRoulette, if you want to kind of test some ideas with me or with the rest of the crowd on how to create challenges. Yeah, those are all, I think, good things to talk about. So if you have anything, then now is a great time to do it. Just wanted to point at a few resources. All those links are live in the online version of these slides, so you can just click on them. The GitHub repository, there's a mailing list actually, MapRoulette at openstreetmap.org. It's been fairly quiet, but I don't see why it would need to remain that way. API examples, for any of you using Postman, I created a collection, Postman collection, to kind of run through all these API calls that you can just test it out for yourself. And then, of course, again, the link to the slides for this presentation, where all these links are live. So, yeah, that's a walkthrough of the challenge creation. I hope it was helpful, and I hope that a lot of you will start thinking about ideas and exploring them and putting them on MapRoulette. And I hope for MapRoulette to continue to be a great way to engage a lot of users to fix small things. And I think there's a lot of small things that need fixing in OpenStreetMap. I know that you know that that's true. So yeah, let's use it. Let's start using it. And I'm hoping to see a lot of creative challenge work out of all of you. Thanks. Could you take questions? Thanks. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I'm fairly new to all the contribution part. So, for instance, my first interaction of contributing is to use the OpenStreetMap Android app, click on and hold, and make an edit, and make a note. And then I realized that the community responded in 30 minutes and started putting things on the map for me. And I said, wow, that's fantastic. But I was thinking now, could I use something similar to create a collection of potential tasks while I'm in the field, and then later on bundle them into a challenge? Maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a really, I haven't heard that before. I think it's a really interesting idea. What you could do, I think, probably, is to just use there's probably apps out there that let you make, I think probably OSM A&D or something can do that, where you can just make little field notes and then export that somehow as a GeoJSON or convert it to GeoJSON.
They go directly on your account, apparently.
Okay.
I don't know how the users are getting it as tasks.
Right.
Apparently this happens.
Yeah, no, I mean the notes, there's various ways of consuming OSM notes. There's an API, an OSM API to retrieve notes based on, I think on a bounding box. You can then translate that and filter it to just have your own tasks and then make that into a Meprolight. There's a few nuts and bolts that you would need to create for that, but it's definitely possible. I think it's an interesting idea, so yeah, I'd welcome you to explore that. Basically what you'd need to do is retrieve the tasks from OSM, perhaps filter them to only have your own, the task that you created, and then export them as GeoJSON and then, or as OSM tasks. So one thing that I had for the previous version is an API wrapper for Python, so you could easily use the OSM, the MapRoulette API in Python projects. That doesn't yet exist for the new version. I may port it or may not, depending on how much time I have. But right now you would need to write your own kind of access to the OSM API, which is definitely doable, and create something like that. Yeah, why not? I think it's a great idea. Yeah, give me the mic.
Really a simple way to do this is just use Maps.me bookmarks, export them as KML and convert them to GeoJSON, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
I checked quickly the MapRoulette. There are some terms like projects and surveys also in addition to challenges. Can you explain that a bit?
Sorry, but projects and what?
Surveys.
Oh, surveys, yeah. So that's a part I didn't cover. So that's a little bit of a MapRoulette future that you see there. One thing we've been working on, we're not quite there yet. The survey, the traditional challenges work like this, right? So where you see it on the map, you go to ID or JOSM, fix it, go back to MapRoulette and say, okay, I fixed it. The survey challenges that don't really exist yet in the user interface work a little differently. They basically provide the user with well, you could see it as a yes or no question. So you basically MapRoulette would be turned into a question and answer machine. So basically you would say, for example, does this building still exist based on what you see on the underlying aerial or satellite images? And if the user clicks yes, then he goes on to the next task. If the user clicks no, then the building would be removed from OSM without you having to go in and edit it. So it would become more like map swipe or something like that, where you have really quick question and answer, like can you see this or can't you? Is this right or is this wrong? So that's actually a pretty interesting addition to MapRoulette that would make it possible to have tasks that are much that can be used, that users can solve much quicker and do all kinds of interesting validation type stuff. But again, there's no user interface for it yet, so that needs to be written still. But it's thanks for pointing it out, because I actually wanted to mention it.
I keep finding duplicates. For example, let's say 2 British embassies in Paris. So one must be the original, one must be the duplicate. But each task I can only give one object. Can I then add in the description, is this a duplicate of X? Because this might be the original and the other one might be the duplicate.
No, you can add multiple objects for each task. The GeoJSON for a task, or the I think through the if you use the wizard, it would be hard. Because through overpass queries, there's no way to link or get responses that represent multiple objects. But through the API, if you create tasks, the geometries, the GeoJSON part of the task object can contain multiple geometries if you want. You can even have each object can have its own little balloon, a pop-up balloon. So if the user clicks on it, they can see which is which. So there's definitely ways you could do that, just not through the wizard. You would have to use the API to add tasks that have multiple geometries. Yeah.
Other questions?
Can I have different instructions for each task?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yes, you can. By default, it will populate. So in the wizard, you saw that there's only one instruction field for the entire challenge. But you can, especially if you use the API, you could have different instructions for each task. That can actually be really useful if you have tasks that need specific information, like the image example that you had earlier. Then you can do individual instructions for each task. So it will have a default instruction, and if you don't override it, it will just use that. But if you override it for a task, then yeah, you can have different ones. Yep.
Okay, anyone? Other questions? Okay, I will ask one question. With MapRoulette, you say, okay, we can make the task, but not so huge. I can imagine, as you said, that 100,000 tasks to realize it's not so, I would say, so pleasant. But, well, could we imagine to have a huge task like, okay, completely crazy, making land use accurate, okay, but splitting up sufficiently, I would say, splitting up sufficiently so that we have, say, 100 or 1,000 tasks, like I would say, for example, just the residential in one area and so on.
Yeah, again, like if you, as long as the tasks themselves are simple and you can solve them within a very reasonable small amount of time, and the total number of tasks in your challenge is not huge. I think that, yeah, as long as you adhere to those basic rules. I mean, they're not hard rules, right? If you want to make a challenge that has 100,000 tasks, I've done it before. We had a railroad crossings challenge. Like in the US, as you all, sorry, I have a lot of US examples. It's just because where I did most of the data analysis in the past. And that's how Meprolight actually got started. This is a little bit of a tangent that's interesting, I think. So as you know, US OSM data got started with the Tiger import back in 2007-8. That's a big mess. It still is in many parts. And then we had the license change, which was concluded in 2012. As you probably know, we couldn't reach a whole lot of users to get them to agree with the license change. And all their data had to be removed. So we had all these gaps in the data. And that's actually how MapRoulette first got started. So I identified all the places where data had been removed without specifically, without having the data itself. And I asked people through what later became MapRoulette to look at this part and re-add the way that was missing, the road that was missing. So that's how MapRoulette got started. Getting back on track, we had this railroad challenge where the Tiger data had all these railways and it had the normal roads, but there were no crossing markings, and even the roads were disconnected, the railroads and the regular roads were disconnected, and so we had this challenge that contained 120,000, I think, cases where the railroads were just crossing the regular roads, and there was no railroad crossing. And those got, people seem to be very annoyed by this, apparently, so those got fixed pretty quickly. Not all of them, but we got through quite a lot of them. So that was one example of a challenge that was pretty huge, but I think as long as the tasks are simple enough and you get a lot of people interested in it, then who knows, you might be able to solve something that has 100,000 tasks pretty quickly. So.
Just, okay, you took the example of Tiger in the US. The example I was thinking of is Corinne Land cover in Europe, actually, which is more or less the same, completely inaccurate, if I could say.
Yeah, yeah. As long as you can come up with good, targeted questions about the stuff that is missing. You might even want to split it up in different types of problems that exist, especially the land cover data sets. They're really tricky. There's been a lot of discussion around the CanVec imports that happened in Canada, people complaining about that. I mean, it's just tricky, so there's a lot of problems. And I think some of these problems are really interesting to solve with a tool like MapRoulette. So, yeah, I'm hoping people get creative with it again. Yeah. So if there's no more questions, I want to thank you very much for your interest, and just let me know at any time if you want to know more, if you want to work with me to create challenges. Aside from the mailing list, there's also the OSM US Slack channel. There's a separate MapRoulette group or channel, I think it's called, where people ask questions from time to time. So I'm also there, or just drop me a line on email. That's also good. I'm always pretty excited to get new people started with this, so I'm happy to help. Thanks.